I'm sitting outside a house in the Crumpsall area of Manchester, socially distanced from the two people I'm with. The first one is Martin Conway, who you won't hear much of. Afternoon, Martin.
Afternoon, Thomas.
And also with me is Louise Eaton. How are you, Louise?
I'm good, thank you.
And just to confirm, we are socially distanced.
We are indeed.
Now, if I've got this recording right, you'll be coming through the left speaker mainly,
Okay.
and I'll be coming through the right speaker. So,
Marvellous.
and the little device is somewhere about a metre
Okay.
from me and a metre from
So
you.
that's social distance as well.
That's
There you go.
even the recording device is socially distant.
Yeah.
Now, there is a serious point to this podcast, because a couple of weeks ago you had to go down to Brighton for essential travel
Yes,
reasons,
Absolutely, yeah.
and you had quite a journey. So,
I did.
talk us through what happened.
Well, it was a very surreal journey. Trains are usually packed and you can't sit down, and there was none of that. There was about 10 people on the train, which is really strange. And, you know, you can usually hear the toilet door opening and the button pressing, and there was none of that. It was just eerie. It was like being on the ghost train, really. Not literally in Blackpool Pleasure Beach, but it was completely different. It was very strange.
And that was from Manchester to
that was from
Euston.
Manchester to Euston, yeah.
Did anybody come past you at all? Did any members of staff
No,
approach
well,
you?
Only about 2 hours into the journey.
And what
Someone
happened then?
came round and asked me if I wanted a coffee.
Now, we ought to point out that, of course, at Manchester Piccadilly, you did get assistance as a visually impaired person.
We did get
that was
assistance
needed.
as a visually impaired person, yeah, and they were all masked up and everything. So it was very professionally and properly done, and it was great. And they helped me on the train, and it was fantastic. The problem arose really when I got to Euston. The staff at Euston were great. They came on the train and helped me off and took me to the underground, and that was where the problem arose.
What happened?
Because the underground, the transport for London, and apparently I'd been told that they had, over the last couple of days before I travelled, they'd been assisting people, and, you know, because if they couldn't do it, they would provide taxis for visually impaired passengers, and the assistance man announced that to me because he thought that was still the policy. And so I was thinking, okay, well, that's really nice of them, you know, they can't, obviously, if they can't help me in the underground, I'll get a taxi.
And to be clear, you had to get to Victoria, London Victoria train station.
Yes.
So
Yeah,
go on.
from
So
Euston.
they couldn't help you. So
No.
a taxi was provided, was it?
Yeah, but, well, I paid for it. They said they weren't doing that anymore, so I actually had to pay
So
for
you were of the understanding that they were going to
Yes.
pay for this taxi,
Yeah.
but they didn't.
No, they said that they changed their policy. They weren't doing it anymore.
And it's only 4 stops from Euston to Victoria. Why on earth couldn't somebody just walk you down to the Victoria
I mean,
line?
they helped me at Euston, and
The
there was no
overground.
problem. Yeah, and it was the same, you know, the same procedure. So why couldn't they wear a face mask and do it? I just thought there was no point to it, really.
Did they give you any indication as to what they were doing with other visually impaired people generally?
Oh, just the assistance man who was very nice, because unusually, you know, because London is so busy normally, you're lucky to get one person to help you, but I had 2 walking me to the buggy, you know, they were overly compensated and overly friendly at Euston. They were great.
That's the overground, but when you got to the
But
underground...
when I got to the underground, there was nothing. No.
Talk me through the conversation at the underground with the staff there.
The gist of it was that they'd changed their policy and they weren't actually assisting any passengers that needed it at the moment because they couldn't. They didn't really say why, whether they were understaffed, overstaffed, or what, or whether. I presume they had the PPE. I just honestly don't know. They didn't really give a reason, to be honest. They just said no, and that I'd have to get a taxi, which I did. But I didn't know that there was a protest going on in London at the time. So it took me an hour to get to Victoria, which is only like 4 stops away, as you said, rightly pointed out. It took me a long time to get there. We couldn't even get close to the station because of the protest. So the taxi driver very kindly parked his car up and walked me to the station through the middle of this protest. So it was very, very strange, very surreal to walk through all the crowds to get to Victoria Station. And once I got there, they were brilliant. The buggy was there and they helped me on the train. And
so this is back to the overground staff,
yes,
is it?
back to the overground. The overground staff, no problem with at all. It was just the underground that...
How much did the taxi cost?
Over 30 quid.
What did the taxi driver say? What was his view on all of
He
this?
was horrified that the fact that they weren't helping and assisting, and the fact that he you know, he was very kind. He didn't have to help me, and he did, which was brilliant. You know, he went out of his way, and he parked his car, and anything could have happened to his taxi, but he gave me priority, which is really what London should have done, and they didn't.
What, the Underground?
The Underground, yeah.
Did they give you any reason at all as to why their policy has changed,
No.
if indeed it had changed?
Well, I don't know if it had. Maybe I just got, or you know, spoke to the wrong people, or you know, they weren't aware of it, or they just come on duty. You don't know the reasons, do you? And I'm not criticising anybody, you know, not slagging anybody off. I just think that it was something that shouldn't have happened.
Often as visually impaired people, the level of help we get depends on the person who happens to be there at the time, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
What would you like London Underground to do then?
Well, I think just to explain their current policy now, and whether they are helping and assisting, just so that it will help other blind people to know what their policy is, and just so that we can be aware of it.
And what advice would you give to other visually impaired people travelling, and particularly those who have to use the Underground?
Well, I would say maybe check the journeys beforehand, check the policy, check, you know, the travel arrangements, and if they can, you know, and you just assume things are normal naively, and they're not. They're really not. And travelling is a completely different experience now.
What do you make of all this, Martin? You travel to work quite regularly, don't you? Still,
I do, but I don't have to use public transport, Tom. I'm lucky enough to be covered by access to work taxis. So this was the first journey that somebody who I would know well, who's visually impaired, had undertaken. So we were kind of interested in seeing how it would go. And obviously it went mostly well, but unfortunately, I mean, I suppose what I would say is there's a lack of, what we need to know is, for visually impaired people who actually live in London and have to travel regularly, is what is the policy? Is there a policy? And it needs to be spelled out clearly and consistently, because obviously the message that comes back from what happened to Louise is that actually you won't get any help. So effectively, if you're on the Underground in London and you're visually impaired, you're on your own. That's the message that was being sent out as a result of what happened last week. Now, if that's not the policy, and this is somebody misinterpreting, you know, changes, then they need to become clean and actually say, no, it was wrong on the day, actually we're going to do this. So it's about having a clear policy for people who have to use the Underground in London. And I suppose what I would say is that we all recognise that we are classed as visually impaired people as vulnerable adults. And I would say that what the effect of this policy was, as it happened on that day, was to place a vulnerable adult in an even more vulnerable position, because they had a choice. They obviously knew that the demonstration was on. That would have been known. Obviously Louise didn't know that when she booked the ticket, and the demo was quite impromptu in how it was organised. But by Wednesday afternoon, the staff on the Underground would have been very clear of what was going on in the city. And rather than actually put someone, as you rightly say, Thomas, with PPE on a tube, 4 stops, get them around the whole protest, get them safely to their destination, they actually inadvertently placed her in an even more vulnerable. They made a vulnerable adult more vulnerable, handed her over entirely to a taxi driver, who could have been anybody, and could have refused to do what Louise's taxi driver did and walk her to Victoria, which he did. So they could have left her completely, basically in the middle of London, on her own, potentially in the middle of a protest and a volatile situation. So they clearly didn't think through the effects of what they were actually saying. So I suppose what we really need to know is, was this the actions of somebody who misinterpreted a policy, or is this actual Greater London Transport policy? Because we need to know that, because obviously that's got huge implications for the quite high number of visually impaired people who live and work in London.
Thank you very much to both of you in the end. It was a little impromptu there with Martin, but thank you very much. And I think it's time to have a refreshment, don't you?
Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah.